on?
There will be horror time. Last week we had a guest. This week, just back to the basics, just me and you. Before we get into that, how you feeling, buddy?
I'm feeling pretty good. Movies this week were good on the whole. I feel like, I think we've been picking stuff on the whole. Like there really haven't been many movies that we've picked where I've been like, oh, no, it's this shit. So that's good. I think we've been good. And we're not going too blind into stuff.
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, obviously with the new release, no new releases today, but like in theory, with new releases, you never know. Like I hated Texas Chainsaw, and I wasn't the biggest fan of Girl Walks Alone at Night. But in theory, it's like we don't completely dread most of these watches, so it makes at least for the start of it. Once we build up the podcast and the show, then we start deep diving into the shit. But for now, we want to just get our opinions on some good ones, and this is an interesting matchup. Why I don't know exactly. Oh, last week we had Abel. He recommended The Mist, so obviously we started there, and then we kind of branched off. So we went The Mist, Annihilation, and Monsters, kind of like outside, unknown monster / environmental whatever. So yeah, I mean, I guess we can get started. Which one do you want to start with today?
So what came out? The Mist came out first, right? Let's just go in order. Like, we could do Mist, Monsters, Annihilation. We'll just go in like timeline order. Yeah, the theme this week is basically like monsters in the unknown, which is kind of which there's plenty of movies like that. So we just picked the top 3 that came to mind. And like I said, Abel mentioned The Mist. Now, The Mist for me, and I think I kind of had this conversation on an earlier podcast when we did Firestarter, and I believe we were going to do Cujo, we didn't do it. But anytime a Stephen King adaptation comes up, I kind of put extra scrutiny on it because I'm such a perfectionist with his work. And The Mist wasn't a novel; it's a novella. Yeah. But it was definitely one of my favorite, like, longer than a short story, shorter than a novels that Stephen King ever wrote. And like they're actually, I think I put in my comment on Letterboxd, like if you can find it, they did an audio play of The Mist, which was like perfect. So like I kind of always had high expectations for The Mist. Not that it's a bad film. There's a lot of things about it that just bother me. But what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so The Mist is one of those where first time I watched it, it blew my socks off just because of that ending. And then on subsequent watches, it still holds up for me. Like, I really love the dynamic of Thomas Jane's character with his son, with 97 different characters from The Walking Dead. And then just the relationship between him and his neighbor from Brooklyn Nine-Nine was always just fun seeing him every time I go back and watch that. And then just the crazy Jesus lady. And then you have the soldiers are in there doing their thing. And then, it takes its time with the monsters. And I really like that. And, so don't get me wrong. There's like 2 or 3 scenes where you're like, oh, yeah, that CG is not that great. But for a little less than a 2-hour movie, the majority of it looks good and holds up. So I give it credit for that because it's more of the unknown, which is kind of, today's, theme. And that really works for me. I just love the atmosphere of the single location. And I love movies that it's similar like to how The Thing, the different characters start to get, panicking and start to get paranoid and all that stuff. And it really brings that out. And it did a good job of that. And, I've always loved this movie. The ending holds up. It's like movies like Primal Fear and stuff like that, and The Usual Suspects, where the ending is like, oh, the ending is the only good part of the movie. It's like, no, I've always really liked this movie, and it's borderline a top 100 movie for me. Like, every time I watch it, like I always hesitate putting it in there, and it always does it for me. But it's interesting. I've never read the novella or anything like that, so I don't have any ties to that.
You should check it out. You should check it out.
Fun fact: I've only The Shining. And it's all been audiobooks, but The Shining and like a quarter of It. But those are the only 2 Stephen King novels that I've had any access to. So I'm definitely behind in that.
There's quite a few books you should read. Definitely. Yeah, let me tell you what I like about The Mist. Like all the characters are great. First of all, Bill Sadler, all-star, every movie he's in. No matter what he does, I can't say anything bad about Bill Sadler. That guy is like one of my favorite character actors working for the time he's been working. Obviously, like you mentioned, Marcia Gay Harden is fantastic in it. All the Walking Dead people, playing just random characters popping up. The kid is great. I think Andre Braugher is great. Thomas Jane goes like full Punisher when his character isn't the Punisher. Yeah. He's an artist. They're all good characters. My problem with this is like they rush a lot of plot points in this movie. For example, like when they go in the back and the kid from American Pie gets killed, then the buildup of the fight between Bill Sadler's character and Thomas Jane's character, it's like it comes out of freaking nowhere. Like, and like in the novella, like the relationship between Dave Drayton and his neighbor Norton, it teases out more like Mrs. Carmody's rise to like taking over the minds of the people, through her religious speaking. Takes more time, so like you really have to rush a lot of plot points that are more slow burns than the novella. So like you get to points. Like this is better served as like a 2-3 part miniseries than a 2-hour movie. And then while you mentioned the ending, of course the ending, whether we spoil it or not, I don't really care. But it's not so much the ending that bothers me. Obviously, I think that's a great ending. I think just the coincidences that they force at the ending, like, oh yeah, Melissa McBride's character who left and you thought she was dead just happens to be driving down the same exact road that they drove an entire tank of gas away from me, and she's in the same exact road. Like, dude, come on, like that was. Like if it just ended with the army showing up, that's still a punch in the face. You didn't need her, driving past to drive. Like, we're not stupid. Like that it's little things like that like take me out of it. It's still like it's not a bad movie, and I still recommend this movie. I think it's a fair enough adaptation. I just think they've done it better.
Yeah, it's one of those where it just Frank Darabont as the director, he's 3 for 3 with me. I still haven't seen The Majestic, so I haven't seen all 4 of his movies, but Shawshank's my number 2 movie of all time. Green Mile's in my top 50, depending on the day of how recent I've watched it and where I'm ranking it. And The Mist, like I said, it's borderline top 100 every time I think about it, and I'm always debating. So it's definitely one of my favorite horror movies because it's, I don't want to call it nostalgia because it's not nostalgia, but it's one of those where it's like it's been with me for a long time. And I talk about this, whether it's with you or with Pez when we were ranking stuff. It's like that means a lot to me because it needs to hold up, but it also needs to have that longevity and just that lasting that standing power of just like being with me. So it's always been there, and I like that score at the end, that kind of that haunting, it's really in your head. And then his scream, it's one of those where people can pick and be like, oh, is it overact? And yeah, he just had to kill everybody, and he wanted to like kill himself. And it's it's one of those where it's like like
he steps out of the car. He steps out of the car ready to face a horrible death, because who knows, like the way some of the people die in that movie it's freaking horrible. So you don't know what's gonna happen. He's expecting to get cut in half or like melted or whatever, and like he steps out of the car and he faces the realization that if he had waited 90 more seconds,
literally
everyone would have been alive. And that's a great choice. And like I can't fault the filmmakers making that choice. And actually, back to one of your other points, the CGI in The Mist is not that bad. I think by 2007 standards, it really isn't that bad. I don't think any of it's really hokey, because it is combined with some practical effects. Like when they cut the tentacle off the monster, the tentacle's left behind. There's good practical effects there. I do believe there are some practical effects of some of the bugs and some of those like bird monsters. Yeah. So it's
more of when they're trying to do an action scene with the CG that obviously it stands out, but they're so far and in between that it's not that big of a deal, that it's because it's not an action movie. Yeah. And speaking of like the horror stuff, the bugs, the one scene when they go to the pharmacy and they go to like do the little raid, and like they got the sacks in the belly and it's coming out. Oh my god, that's good, so creepy. Yeah. Oh my god, and it's a little reminiscent of like Alien, but it's like an homage. It does a good job of paying tribute to that type of scene, but also Alien or Aliens technically, but both vibes. But anyway, it does a good job of not feeling a ripoff. It feels like its own entity, while still obviously paying homage to that. And I feel like that's how you do it right. And I feel like that's Frank Darabont's ability of being a good filmmaker, and knowing how to tell a good story, but also and fun fact, with this, not fun fact, but just interesting fact, where like this is I feel like it's a really good, well-made horror movie, but like all of his other movies are not that at all. So it just showcases his ability, because if you think about Shawshank and Green Mile, you're like, oh, he's just a prison movie guy. And like I said, I haven't seen.
They're also Stephen King stories, so
so it just depends. Let's Stephen King reign true there. But so The Mist, it's a 5 out of 5 for me. It always has been. I love this movie. It's just it means a lot to me because I can put it on anytime. I don't even have to be in a specific mood, really. It's a great like rainy day movie too. Like if it's raining and I feel like that, it's a perfect setting for that. And it's a great date movie, and until the end. But at that point, it opens the door for discussion if it's like a first date. So you never know.
So how do you feel about kids?
Yeah.
Are you more of like shoot them in the head when things get bad, or are you like we keep them alive?
So yeah, that ending. So what are your thoughts on euthanasia? Like
with a gun. For me, and again, I think if I wasn't as big of a fan of Stephen King as I am, I might be in the same boat as you. But just like I'm such a perfectionist with this stuff. It's a 3 out of 5, but I recommend it 3 out of 5, but I recommend it just because like I feel because having watched the Shawshank Redemption, having watched The Green Mile, like Frank Darabont in those issues or whatever writers he was working with, they cut enough plot points out of those movies and didn't refer to like other B storylines and C storylines to streamline those movies into 2.5 hour features. Whereas in The Mist, that they left like remnants of storylines and had to rush stuff and like refer to things that were full-fledged storylines in the story. It was really disjointed to me, and it took me out of it. Knowing the story took me out of it. Yeah, so I'm being a dick, but it's 3 out of 5.
That's fair. I mean, I don't hate you for it. I know that there's movies that I have opinions on based on how it ties into a franchise or an IP or whatever. So I mean, yeah, I'm still glad you're positive on it. So obviously, I guess my question for the people for The Mist, what were your thoughts, your initial reaction to that ending, and if you've seen it more than once, how does it hold up? After initial viewing, is it one of those where it's a first time watch only type of movie for you, or does it still hold up on a repeat viewing? So comment below and let us know that. Jumping into chronological order, the next one is a first time watch for me, but I'll let you open the doors with Monsters.
This wasn't a first time watch, but I've seen it a few times. You might know Gareth Edwards as the person, and actually this movie is the reason I think how he got Godzilla.
It's gotta be
the work he did on this movie. And like I tried to sway Henry by going like, hey, this only had a budget of $500,000. Like they did a masterpiece. And Henry's like, go to hell. So basically, we know how he feels about this movie. but I think what they accomplished with Monsters, if you read anything about the production of this movie, like basically, it was basically a crew of like 6 to 8 people just kind of traveling around Central America, shooting this movie on non-professional equipment. Most of the dialogue is ad. They do a fantastic job, and it's a very, very basic story. Like this rich girl, like this guy, he's a photojournalist. His boss's daughter is stranded below what's called the infected zone. The infected zone is kind of like the northern part of Mexico. Aliens had crash landed there 6 years ago, and they are like mist looking, like the big creatures in the mist, like the big like at Star Wars looking creatures.
What you assume it looks like if you were able to see all of it, yeah.
Yeah, because you see flashes of them later on. They look like octopus spider monsters, and basically but everything's contained. They're contained in this zone in northern Mexico. So the U.S. troops are keeping them from getting to Texas. The Mexican troops are keeping them from getting down to like the Yucatan. So they're stranded on one side, and he kind of promises his boss, "Yeah, I'll get your daughter home soon." And the Mexican government, being the Mexican government, is all corrupt, and like they're not letting them get they're charging like tons of money that you can take a ferry for like $5,000. You can have basically guerrillas take you up through the infected zone. So it's basically just like these 2 people just trying to get back to America, and does a lot happen? No, nothing happens. That is literally the entire story. But I think they do a really, really good job, and I think the effects for a $500,000 budget are like out of this world. They don't really do much. There's only like a couple of scenes where they do CG or whatever. It's beautifully shot. They got footage of actually I think the reason why they got such great footage is they didn't ask permission to shoot any of the footage. So when they're on those Mexican ruins, I guarantee if they had gotten caught, they would have been in jail for a very long time. But yeah, so basically they got Gareth Edwards broke lucky at every step of the way for Monsters. And it's a movie I think everybody should see. So Henry, go ahead and say the opposite.
So I'll start off by saying in the last 10 minutes when you actually see the monsters full on, I was like, okay, here we go, let's go. But this movie was similar to how I felt by the end of World of World, where it leads up with characters that I just didn't connect or care about, and they're not as interesting. And because of the guerrilla format or however you go about it, whether it's the budget or just the style, it just didn't work for me. You know what I mean? I just wasn't intrigued in the story because of the simple story. The dialogue didn't hold me. The characters, nothing about them stood out. Their relationship didn't do anything for me. I thought they were doing a good job, like when she goes to the apartment or the hotel, whatever it is, and she's gonna go see him, and then she sees like someone in bed, and then she gets mad. I thought that was really gonna build a dynamic, and it was not really. Like it just didn't care, and it bummed me out because the concept of what this movie was, had me. And like I said, in that ending, like I was like, all right, if it ends with the final showdown, I might be cool with like 3 stars. But then because it didn't, I went down to 1 star. Like I just did nothing for me, because it's like my thought process is I have to, like, for example, tomorrow when this movie is like out of my life, if I close my eyes and I think about this movie, what am I latching onto? What is my memory? And my only memory is that one scene when you have like the aliens like walking around or whatever. And I'm like, all right, even then, nothing else. You know what I mean? At least in War of the Worlds, which I hated, by the way, at least they're zapping people and like exploding them, and I'm like, wow, that was brutal. So at least I have that where I'm like, all right, maybe I could be positive, but like the rest of it was so unbearable. But anyway, with this one, it just didn't do anything for me, and it bummed me out because a little tangent. I just watched Halloween 2 for the first time, the Rob Zombie one, and as I was watching that, I'm like, the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, what is the point? Like, what am I, what am I getting out of this movie? And then that's kind of what I was thinking about with Monsters. Just a coincidence. I watched them kind of back to back, you know what I mean? And I just had the similar vibes. And usually I don't give 1 stars that often, you know what I mean? So it's not like I'm just out here throwing them around, and I'm just a, crazy petty critic.
If you pull your face off and you're Kirk Kolakowski, I'm very upset.
You know what I mean? It just didn't do anything for me. And I feel like it's a combination of boring and just so pointless. Sometimes there's movies where I'm like, all right, I get, what they were going for, but I was bored to tears, so I give it the 2 stars. Or like 3 stars if I'm like, all right, there's a scene that I really liked, or a character I really liked, or whatever. This one, I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't even see the point, and I was bored to tears. You know what I mean? It just bummed me out because I went in with I don't want to say high expectations. I wasn't expecting this to be like a favorite, but I went in with good expectation. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a good triple feature because I like the other 2 movies a lot. You know what I mean? So I thought this would have been a good, dynamic, and just didn't work for me. So it bummed me out. But sometimes that's why we do this. We take those risks, and it's always been on my radar, but I probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger to watch this without this show. So at least I can say I've seen it, and it is what it is. So
yeah, we are pretty far apart on this one. This was a 4.5 for me.
Yeah,
pretty
saw
easy.
that.
And actually, like, in the movie, it ends where it ends, but it actually wraps around because the opening shot of the movie is the actual end of the movie, but you don't realize it's the end of the movie until you get to the end of the movie.
Yeah, I forgot.
Which I also exactly, which is like you actually find out you kind of find out what happens to the characters if you're paying attention. On a rewatch, you definitely figure out what happens.
It might jump up to 2 stars on a rewatch, but the odds of me rewatching it.
But like I think, and not that Henry missed anything, he didn't. Like I can totally respect the opinion of you're not being invested in the characters, but I do think it's kind of like I think the fact that the motives of the characters and the goals of the characters are so simple, and you kind of throw in like the corrupt government and just the unknown and just with these creatures, and basically they kind of paint the aliens as sympathetic too, because there's the whole scene where they're getting shuttled up north by the kind of like mercenaries, and they're like, we don't mess with the monsters, they don't mess with us. Look at this is how they breed, this is how like their whole life cycle, and like you see at the end of the movie, like they don't mess with the monsters, and they actually just standing there, and the monsters just basically have sex, I guess, in front of them, whatever, and they go their own separate ways. So there's a lot of like things upon a rewatch that you kind of catch in this movie that are pretty well done. And fun fact, actually, the Scoot McNairy and Whitney Able were dating. They actually are a real life couple when they filmed this movie. So they had like a dynamic between each other, which was you can kind of feel when you see them.
Yeah. That's why I thought the potential was there just from the writing, though. And their characters didn't actually have that. You know what I mean? It was like, I don't know. It was just missing. So yeah, like I said, it's a bummer for me. But I'm glad it's a favorite of yours. And I feel like sometimes with movies like this that are not the mainstream most popular, we have differing opinions. But like that's good. You know what I mean? Sometimes I like that, and that's why I enjoy that. Speaking of, excuse me, differing opinions. Our final movie is Annihilation. And this is a movie that I love. Or let me rephrase. I haven't always loved it. The first time I watched it, especially you, I wasn't as low as with you, spoiler alert, on first watch. But the first time I watched it, I was like, I just don't know what that movie was. So I've watched a bunch of reviews. I've watched a bunch of videos. I've seen it now multiple times. Now that I've seen both Alex Garland's follow-up with Men and just rewatching, Ex Machina a few times, I just know that, his style and just kind of, certain things he goes for. Annihilation is a movie that, so this area is surrounded by this bubble, and it's kind of taken over, and it's like the unknown. Like you go in, you haven't seen anyone like 8 months or whatever the specific time frame is, and their mercenaries are going in, and the whole time they're sending in like soldiers, but they're like, all right, let's actually go in with like scientists. Let's actually try and get some real data and not just try and have brute force. So it actually serves a purpose of being an all-female cast, what doesn't seem like it's like throwing any agendas in your face. It makes sense through it, and you don't even think about it. No one ever talks about it like that. There's like, cool, all-female led movie. So I like that about that. And then Natalie Portman's character, she's doing it because a combination of her guilt, but also just dealing with just her own emptiness, after her husband's mystery, of like what's going on with him. And then you slowly start to get her backstory of her cheating before even he was gone. So it's starting to build that go with her guilt. You have the one character who is lost her kid. I think it was cancer. You have Tessa Thompson. Leukemia. Tessa Thompson's character, who's a cutter, and then pretty much everything with Jennifer Jason Leigh, who kind of is just done. Which she just needs answers, you know what I mean? It's kind of like
she is also dying of cancer.
Well, yeah, but she wants to. It's like in Martyrs though. She doesn't want to go out with no answers. You know what I mean? She's like, This is my last chance. I need to know. You know what I mean? So it's one of those. And then obviously you have Gina Rodriguez character who's just kind of brute force. Yeah, she's kind of that.
She wants to kind of fuck shit up.
Yeah, she wants to be in the action.
Yeah, and she says she's from Chicago, so that stereotype just plays right into the movie. So that's fantastic.
Exactly. I connect that. I get it. Yes, and correct. And then so I love the concept of it. My only real flaw, even on multiple viewings, is the first time that they go in, and it does the thing where it's been 4 days or whatever because they fall asleep. It just kind of takes you away from the first experience of it. Like it works thematically in terms of story, like, oh wow, you're cutting straight into it. You're like, yep, this is what it does. Time's gonna jump, and it's not always gonna tell you that it's gonna jump. You know what I mean? You're kind of just have to trust us. So I do like that, but it's just the first time that you go, you kind of miss that awe and that all that stuff. But I've always juggled that, but I just love the dynamic of the characters, and similar once again to The Mist, with the characters, once your back's against the wall, you start to build the paranoia. You start to see the true colors of characters. You start to see their decisions when they're paranoid or when their back's against the wall. And I really like just the dynamic of these girls. The bear monster, the practical effects of that, or not practical effects, but whatever it is.
It's good CGI. It's good CGI. I'll say that. That's good.
Yeah, so it does a great job of looking good. So it's a good horror movie while having very strong sci-fi elements to it. And then you find out it's the aliens, so that's what that is. So it kind of ties in with all these all this stuff. And yeah, it's always worked for me. It's one of those it's a deliberately paced movie, but because I care about the characters, both with the dialogue and just their backstories and just how they progress in the story, it's always worked for me. And then just by the end, just the wild wackiness of it. That's what shows. I like. Sometimes I like the over the top. I don't need all the answers, but if it has some sort of payoff and it does some wild stuff and I can enjoy the wildness, I accept it. So that's kind of, I went a little long to give my backstory because now we're going on to yours to maybe answer some questions, maybe give you an idea, open up some minds. Because like I said, I've seen this a bunch of times now at this point. I've watched some videos. I've read some things. You know what I mean? So after your first viewing, what is your thoughts?
I think it's just like an Alex Garland thing at this point. There's a lot of things that he does, or a lot of choices he makes, or they're either choices he makes or mistakes he ignores in the process of making movies. And it isn't just your typical it's a horror movie. People make bad decisions, but like the entire plot of Annihilation, the whole time I'm like, well, why the fuck did they do that? Why would they do this? Here's what took me out of the movie. Pretty much everything. Small point, right? Natalie Portman's character is ex-Army, right? So she's ex-Army and she's a biologist. Nobody else in her crew, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Gina Rodriguez, Tessa Thompson, and the other girl, none of them are military, but they all go in strapped to the gills with M16s, and they're all shooting them. Well, shouldn't Natalie Portman be the only person that knows what they're doing? And also considering the fact they sent in platoon after platoon before that, but I digress. Secondly, if you're really researching the facility and you just keep sending in people blind. In The Mist, at least, they had the common sense to tie a rope to somebody and send them in there. Why didn't they think of that? They should have gone in maybe 5 feet and then 10 feet and then 15 feet and then 20 feet. But instead, they're just sending people they're sending people to their death. over and over and over. Like the amount of dead bodies they find in there, like because there's the dead bodies of Oscar Isaac's crew, which you find out later he didn't really survive. That's another plot point. And but then you see like just range after range of like skeletons outside the lighthouse. Whatever. I digress. Then it's kind of haphazard, like what happens to people in Shimmer, right? So you have throw up the spoilers, even though this is like a friggin' 6-year-old movie, or a 4-year-old movie. Like people are getting like legit killed in there. Like the bear like kills people, but then also apparently you can just commit suicide by just going, you know what, I'll die here, which is what happens to Tessa Thompson's character. She decides to just turn into a flower. Then there's a Jennifer Jason Leigh character who turns into freaking the globule from Prince of Darkness. That was bad CG. Like because then you have good CG, then you have bad CG with Jennifer Jason, and that doesn't make any sense. Like why would she? She basically erupts into a fractal for some reason, and then Natalie Portman's doppelganger. She's a fight with a doppelganger, and then it looks like she kills the doppelganger. But then at the end of the movie, it's left in total Alex Garland style ambiguity. Is she the doppelganger or not? We don't know. So fuck you, Alex Garland. 2 stars.
So yeah, I'll answer a couple things. So the Tessa Thompson thing, why she's able to go in the flower and like die, it mentions multiple times with the atoms, the DNA splicing and all that stuff. So it did a good job of like, I mean, obviously the plenty of scenes when they're doing it and it's watching it, and that it also plays into Gina Rodriguez's like paranoia of like, oh man, I'm moving around, especially when they see the video and like all the stuff's inside. So it does a good job of like setting that up. So I've always been okay with the Tessa Thompson experience and outcome. And the Jennifer Jason Leigh, similar thing with her cancer, it like combined, like it was already eating away at her, so she was already dying. So I feel like she was susceptible to like being taken over and like being a host essentially. So that's always been fine with me too, because she's always been accepting of what's going on, or kind of just like there for the ride, you know what I mean? And so I feel like I'm okay with that. And then the ambiguity play, that's it is what it is. Whether it works, whether or not, it's at the end of the day. For me personally, if you have an ending like this, whether it's with Natalie Portman's character or with Oscar Isaac's Kane, it needs to you need to be interested in it, because you want to wonder, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, instead of by the end, you're like, all right, what was the point? And it's ambiguous. At least with this, you have multiple points that you're like.
Well, here's what I'll say just about that. Like, there isn't ambiguity is fine. I obviously don't care about ambiguity in a movie, but there's no consistency in how it's ambiguous, because Oscar Isaac's character comes out, just shows up at home, and he can't remember anything, right? Yeah. And he's clearly the doppelganger because he showed that. Natalie Portman's character, they kind of tell you she is the doppelganger in the movie, but she's able to go through a full-on interrogation from Benedict Wong's character for the entire movie, and she's giving real answers. So, like, what is it? Like, there's no consistency between the two characters.
Well, I think I like that too, because it also showcases that maybe she is her, but it's similar to like in Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, how she got taken over, because obviously she's got the tattoo on her that just kind of like brings on DNA splices or whatever. So I feel like she maybe is still her, but she's been in there so long, because no one's ever been in there so long and come out. So maybe it really is her, but it took her over. So the DNA splice. So now it's like kind of like both. You know what I mean? So I feel like the ambiguity there, where that it does a good job of that, because like the eye flicker or whatever, the eye change, the color or whatever. So I feel like that's more of a DNA thing instead of an identity thing. So I feel like it's always worked for me, and I love the score, by the way, by that end, just everything that
I'll give you that.
Yeah, the score goes crazy. So I mean,
and it's also like one of the other problems with the movie, which I didn't mention, is like there really is it really is dark in a sense that there's no real resolution. The only resolution you get is like, yeah, sure, she survived, but really, if you listen to everything Jennifer Jason Leigh's character said throughout the entire movie, is they have no way of stopping the spread of this thing.
Well, I think it's an allegory for cancer, where it's like, sometimes you can beat it, but sometimes you can't. And I feel like that's just kind of what the story goes for. Like even with Tessa Thompson's character, where it's like she really didn't beat her essentially desire to die. It was more of an acceptance, and at least going out and as a flower, so she can be reborn. And then with Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, she literally can't beat it, so she has to accept it, and it kind of like takes her over a little bit. Gina Rodriguez's character, you can't really always overcome your anger and all that stuff, and it kind of eats at you. And I feel like it does a good job of showcasing the different characters of how they handle whether it's illness, mental illness, or physical illness, sickness, and I feel like it does a good job of being an allegory or metaphor for these types of scenarios while not explicitly saying that. And I feel like that's why by the ending, like I said, with the DNA splice, the whole thing, she's the biologist talking about that opening scene where she talks about the cancer and how it takes over and all that stuff. And I feel like, by the end, why they hug, I feel like because she felt so guilty for like cheating and then losing him, and by the end she accepts because she was like, you may not be my Cain, but I'm with you, you know what I mean? And then the same thing where it's like, I may not even be all of me, but I'm just going to accept my outcome and just move forward. So I feel like the resolution is essentially overcoming whatever and either not necessarily beating it, but just moving forward. And I feel like, that's why that ending is always one of those. I'm like, all right, let's, if there was ever a sequel, I feel like they would answer questions.
I'd be interested in a sequel, and I would watch a sequel, but I don't think that's coming. I think
I feel like
I think with Alex Garland, you're never getting a sequel.
No,
it's never going to happen.
No. I feel like it just opens the door for questions. Like the answers now at that point, now you're like, oh, I wanted those answers. I didn't like those answers. So now I hate both versions. Whereas in this one, you don't get the answers. So now you can, at least make up all the bullshit I'm saying. You know what I mean? Whatever. Yeah. So, now I guess the first question is, do you consider this movie a horror movie now that you've seen it?
There's horror elements. And like, actually what I would have said is like, it was kind of like the same way Event Horizon is, but I feel like Event Horizon was just done a shit ton better than this movie. So like, it's kind of like, here's this thing, we're approaching it, and it's altering our reality, and that the horror is like you have zero control over basically an outside force manipulating you in a way you've never been manipulated before. So that's always a great horror movie. There's plenty of horror movies like that. I think the real fatalistic thing about Annihilation is the implication that they cannot stop this thing from taking over the entire planet eventually. That's another horror element that you're kind of just left with at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
it's like you figure they not that they failed in their mission, but there will have to be subsequent missions into the Shimmer after they're done because they didn't really accomplish anything. They got more questions than answers with Natalie Portman surviving the Shimmer. So it's weird for me. Not only is there zero resolution, but like you're worse off at the end. Like, well, what was that all about?
So do you think you'll be do you think you feel about Annihilation like I felt with Monsters? And do you feel like on rewatch you might have the opportunity to feel better about it, worse about it, or about the same?
I think I might feel better about it if I watch it again. I think your criticism of Monsters and my criticism of Annihilation are the exact opposite. Monsters is just so simple that nothing happens and there's no investment. Annihilation is so complicated with so many things going in all different directions that like it takes you out of it. So like that's basically it. The criticisms are totally opposite reasons.
There you go.
Monsters is very Monsters is a very stripped down movie. It's like a no frills movie.
I feel like Annihilation would be a good watch-along movie for a second-time watch for like something like this, where if you ever wanted to watch again and watch it with, do a little commentary and like actually like point out some certain things, whether it's like the tattoo or the eye color or the hints that they drop. Like for the longest time, the first 2 or 3 times I saw it, I didn't even realize like when she was cheating that those were flashbacks before Kate left. That was those was cheating. That wasn't post-mortem or whatever.
She wasn't cheating when he was like missing. She was cheating. Yeah. Well, so, you get that when the first conversation she has with that guy, where he's like inviting her over her house, and she's clearly like weirded out, like you know something was up then.
Yeah, exactly. But it just vibes like that, where it's like after by the end of it, you're like, I don't know where it's going, so you forget about those things. So now in rewatches, you can pick up on it, and little things like that, where it's like that. That's why I like the sci-fi element to it, because you can kind of make up bullshit and tie it together, and like I said, it works for me. It's been a 5-star movie. I think after my second watch, it bumped up to a 5-star, and it's been for a while now. Like it's been out for 4 years. And it's been one that I've seen probably about 5 or 6 times. I've watched it with people a couple times too. So, and I've had these conversations. So this is one that I've definitely had a conversation with. So when I recommended this to kind of go along with, the theme, I thought it was at least a good idea for a good conversation. So I'm happy about that. So 2 stars for you, said, right?
2, not unsalvageable, but like really,
okay,
really annoying and frustrating.
Even though you're technically negative on it, would you still recommend it?
It would depend. I would consider this like if somebody asked me specifically, like I want a movie that's like sci-fi, horror. I'd be like, all right, have you seen this? Like, I would. That's probably how it would come up. But I wouldn't just if somebody's like, oh, I want a horror movie. I would not recommend Annihilation. If somebody came to me and this checked a bunch of boxes, I would recommend it, especially if they like it. Like, if somebody's like, can you give me a movie like Event Horizon or something?
Yeah.
I'd be, oh, watch Annihilation. So see it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so yeah, that's today's episode. We don't have any new releases, coming up, until Nope. So we don't have a specific plan. But we were kind of talking behind the scenes, and we're thinking about a film that is a Shudder original, and that is called. I already forgot what it's called.
The Sadness. Everyone's talking about this movie, The Sadness.
The Sadness. So The Sadness, and we kind of we don't want to spoil it for ourselves, but we kind of did a semi research of what it could be about, and we're hoping that it'll be similar enough with Train to Busan and One Cut of the Dead. So we're gonna go foreign, horror, maybe zombie, maybe apocalypse. We don't know specifics, but we're assuming
they're basically they're Asian movies about infections.
Yeah,
so either zombie
regardless
infections
of
or
how that resolves later on or what it comes into. There's some sort of infection. So One Cut of the Dead and The Sadness are both on AMC Plus and Shudder. So if you guys want to, watch along with us or, at least have the conversation, go ahead and do that. And then Train to Busan's on Netflix, I'm pretty sure. So definitely go ahead and check that one out. So, John, this was an interesting one. It's this episodes like this are why I like that we do this show, because we don't need to completely agree, but we can have a nice conversation and either see the side of the other, or we can maybe influence the other, or, sometimes you're just not going to agree. And that's life. But So if you made this far in the video, make sure you go ahead and drop a like. Comment below your opinion on these three movies, and just generally speaking, if you'd seen them, what your initial thoughts were, or do you lie on the table of Annihilation with John or me, Monsters of John or me, and The Mist with John or me. Honestly, we're almost completely different with all three of these, and that actually makes that a lot of fun. So subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, because we don't know the exact time that we're going to be live every Monday. Not always every Monday, but 90% of the Mondays, though. It's pretty good. And then make sure you also check out Let's Rank Stuff, me and Alice Peshal on Wednesdays. Same thing, don't know exact time, but post notification bells. And then me and John, as well as Will Cohen, are the hosts and runners of There Will Be Trivia, both singles and teams. So if you like movie trivia, which might be important in the next couple months, to make sure you subscribe, because we're going to have a lot of content for that. So my name is Henry Confidential. That is John Marr. See you guys next Monday to talk about One Cut of the Dead, Train to Busan, and The Sadness. Bye.